Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the education section. So this video is going to be on multi-joint resistance profiles after touching on single joint resistance profiles. Jumping into some more complex movements and more complex movement patterns and kind of following along and tying it together nicely. So in terms of the overview of the episode, like I said, just touching on multi-joint movements, but before I recommend watching the videos prior in the biomechanics section to make this make sense. If you start here, it's going to be very confusing and not make a lot of sense and not be that valuable, because you need to kind of understand the principles prior to go into this and be able to understand and kind of implement what I'm talking about in this video. So again, it might seem a bit of a tangent, but see, understanding this, it means you can do things like kind of alter the way you execute movements to buy certain muscle groups more effectively, like altering, which you'll see I'll get into, like altering like a heel elevation during a barbell back squat. You can then identify why that may be valuable and why would you want to do a conventional deadlift or maybe a straight leg deadlift, and the benefits of like a different grip width during the bench press. So a quick recap: the axis is basically the straight line where an object rotates around. So a shoulder joint during a lateral raise, or in this example, the elbow joint during a bicep curl. The line of force is basically the direction the force is traveling. So straight down. The moment arm is the length between the axis and the line of force, or a 90-degree angle between the line of force and that axis. Or in other words, it's the closest distance, so you wouldn't measure it from up here or down there. It's a 90-degree angle at the closest distance to the elbow joint. And the further away the force is from the axis, the more torque. Or in other words, the larger the moment arm, the heavier the weight will be. Because torque is basically, the calculation for it is basically moment arm times weight. So it's not just about what weight we lift, it's how far it is away from the joint, how big the moment arm is, which will determine the resistance, or in other words, the torque placed on joints. The reason why it's torque and not just resistance is torque is basically when there's a rotational challenge, and that's what takes place on joints. It's not just a challenge, it's a rotational challenge because joints rotate around an axis. So jumping into the barbell back squat. As you can see here, we've got more than one joint involved. We're not just bending at one joint, we're not just bending at the knee, we're bending at the knee and also the hips. As a result, there's a challenge to both joints, the knee and hips. So if you look at the top photo, you'll see joints are relatively stacked, which tells us there's not a lot going on at the top of a squat. There's not a lot of tension placed upon our quads or our glutes or our lower back, just due to everything being stacked, which means there's very little load at all. And there is a good the calculation to find out how much actual weight is here is, if you're, let's say, squatting 100 kilos, then you'd calculate the moment arm. Let's say the moment arm is 0, because it is 0 or very, very close to it, then it would be 100 kilograms times 0, which is 0. So there's the moment, or the amount of torque that's placed on our knee joint and our hip joint is 0. So this tells us there's very little or no challenge to our hip and knee joint. And when we start to lower, you see there now becomes moment arms to joints. Our joints are not stacked. And if you see, basically what we're looking at is the knee joint and the hip joint. So what is responsible for extending at the knee? Our quad. What's responsible for extending at the hips? It will be our glutes and our hamstrings. More so, in this case, it will more be our glutes working. So this kind of tells us that when we are looking at this movement, we will be working our glutes, quads, and our lower back during the bottom portion of the lift more than anything. So as you see, as we start to lower, there's a greater challenge to the hip than the knee, and at the bottom, when we're at parallel, this is when the moment arms are the largest. This is when the torque on our joints are the largest. This is when it's heaviest, or the hardest part of the lift. And the reason being is because the moment arms are the largest due to our joints being parallel to the ground, which means it will be furthest away from the axis. So what this tells us is the squat goes from light at the top, getting heavier, and then heaviest when your upper leg is parallel to the ground, or your femur is parallel to the ground. Any lower, then the moment arms could potentially start to decrease. Like your hips could come even closer to you as they go down. Like they could arc almost forward, if that makes sense. And as you look at the bottom position, and same with like the middle of the rep as well, the line to the knee joint isn't as great as the line to the hip joint. What basically this tells us is this squat is more hip dominant. If it's due to where he's placing the bar, if it's due to his proportions of his upper leg, his lower leg and his torso, or if it's due to not elevating his heel, or a bit of all three will influence it. So this tells us, for this individual, a barbell back squat, yes, it will challenge the quads as shown, because there's torque on the quad. There's also a lot of torque on hip, so it will be more of a, potentially more of a hip dominant movement. Something to consider as well is how strong is each of those muscle groups. For example, like, yes, we don't have as large a moment arm to the knee, but how strong is his quads in relation to how strong his hips are? So our quads could potentially still fail before the hips, just due to our hips being maybe a lot stronger. But this tells us, if we're looking for a movement to purely challenge the quads, to purely challenge knee extension, which is the role of the quads, then the barbell back squat for everyone, including this individual, might not be the best option. So the erectors will also be doing, or will be being used to resist spinal flexion on this movement. So I'm not going to discuss their moment arms, but basically what we think about is you've got different vertebrae on their spine. So you've got different parts of your spine going right down, and then each vertebrae's got a challenge to it if you're not completely stacked. So if you think about it, a moment arm to each vertebrae would be what we're basically looking at, so it gets quite complex. But what we need to know is, if we're not completely upright, there's going to be a challenge to the erectors to maintain upright, or to stay upright. And yeah, so like I said, at parallel, that's when the moment arm to the femur is the largest, or not to the femur, the moment arm to the hip and the knee is the largest, and the femur is parallel to the ground. So yeah, this is more of therefore a hip bias squat, or a glute bias squat, you could say. And as for the stiff leg deadlift, as you can see during this movement, the main challenge is, or the joint that's moving, we're kind of only moving in at one joint. Obviously other things will be working, but apart from, let's say, maybe a very slight bend of the knee, the main thing that's going to be we're working is hip extension. As you can see, there's a challenge to the hip. And if you look at the three photos, you'll see at the bottom, the moment arm to the hip's the largest, so it's heaviest at the bottom. As we get up, it decreases, and then at the top it's the lightest. And this tells us that as we go up, the load drops off, it gets easier, which you could argue is kind of a good exercise, because it allows us to get a stretch on the hamstrings, and we build muscle best for some muscle groups. Hamstrings, there's studies are indicating towards that we build muscle best in that middle and lengthened position. So as you pull, and as you start completing the lift, the movement gets easier. And something I didn't touch on in the barbell back squat is, again, the bottom positions where everything's lengthened a bit more, and that's where it's heavier. So arguably, again, that's a good movement, because it's loading the position we build muscle best in. And same with here. When we are doing these movements, we're in the top positions when the muscles are getting shorter, our hamstrings get shorter at the top, our quads and our glutes are getting shorter, and we're weaker in that shortened position. So you could argue, again, it drops off nicely. Although it's still really light at the top, so you could maybe think about banding or using chains to make it heavier, but that's kind of getting on a tangent. But it makes it a not too bad exercise as a result of that. So as you can see, there's not much challenge to the knee. You can't really see well because of the plates, but the line of force is in front of our knee joint, so we're not getting a ton of challenge to the knee. We will still get some, but it's very, very minimal. Whereas if we look at the conventional deadlift, there's a slight challenge to the quad, because our knee is basically over, or at the starting position, our knee's travelling past the bar, meaning there's a moment arm to our knee, and also a moment arm to our hip. So this tells us that although this will work hip extension, this will load the glutes, the hamstrings, it will also load the quad. So if we're, let's say, got great quads and we've got weak hamstrings and glutes, then this could potentially be a poorer movement to target the glutes and hamstrings due to that quad involvement. Whereas we could do a straight leg deadlift where we're not going to have as much challenge due to our knee not basically travelling forward as much and not getting as much bend in the knee. Because obviously we want to take our muscle groups for a large range of motion. So as you can see, here you're probably not going to get as large a range of motion at the hips just due to the fact that you are bending the knee to get lower down and to compensate. And you're going to be using that muscle group. Next up, the barbell press. So as you can see, when we are doing the barbell press, due to your grip remaining the same, the line of force actually remains unchanged because the weight, because your hand can't move, so the weight is trying to push down at all times. So the moment arm actually stays the same to the shoulder joint, but we've got a slightly greater moment arm to the wrist joint, whereas we don't really at the top. And this means we don't really have a change in the moment arm to the pec, so there's tension on the pec at all times. However, like I said, at the bottom there's a slight moment arm, a slight challenge to the elbow, due to our elbow not being completely stacked under the bar. Where you grip will dictate how much of a moment arm there'll be to the elbow. For example, I'll dive into this in future lessons and maybe expand, but instead of, let's say, pressing like this, if I had a really narrow grip, then at that bottom position, if the weight's trying to travel this direction, and I'm here, then the moment arm's going to be almost going down there, so there's going to be a challenge to the elbow. So this shows like how grip can influence what you're biasing. So our setup is key in terms of getting the right grip and getting the right technique when we're performing movements. Because if we, let's say, fail our setup, if we do a poor setup, then we're going to inhibit our ability to, let's say, target the triceps or target the chest effectively before even completing one rep. So it's not just about technique, it's also about setup. And yeah, like I said, a narrower grip will bias a bit more triceps due to being a larger moment arm to it. Also, we've got to be aware of there's more than one plane we're working in, which means yes, we're looking at like moment arms in this direction, but what happens if we turn side on? If we look at them from side on, unless you are, let's say, performing the movement, I hope not, but let's say you're performing the movement and during it, your upper arm is completely in line with your shoulder and it's not in front of you slightly. If your elbow's not in front of you slightly, then you've not got much happening from a side-on perspective. But if it's in front of you, you've got a challenge to the shoulder because your shoulder is basically resisting rolling forward and just the weight dropping. There's a challenge to the shoulder joint if we're looking from a side-on point of view. And what I mean, I'll demonstrate that now is if I'm performing the movement, if I am not completely side-on like this, there's obviously no challenge. But if I'm here, there's a challenge because the weight's wanting to basically push me down, push me that way. My shoulder's wanting to go like this. And there's force basically trying to prevent that from taking place. So, yeah, in terms of something else to consider, this is getting a bit tricky and a wee bit more technical, but at the top position of the barbell bench press, we aren't actually just pressing up, we're pressing out. Look where the guy's arm is facing, it's not facing straight up. So there's going to, think about if the bar had, let's say, let's say it was ice, or it had fairy liquid all over it, so it was extremely slippy and it had no knurling. Where would his hands go if he was trying to do it with max weight? They wouldn't just stay there, they'd slip outwards. And what does that tell us? There's a challenge, we are pressing out as well. As a result, if we're pressing out, that changes the line of force, because force isn't just travelling down, because we're pushing out, we're creating another line of force. We're creating a line of force that's kind of pushing back at us, because if we're pushing this way, then there's a challenge pushing the opposite way, if that makes sense. So this basically changes the line of force. So instead of the line of force being straight down, like it is on the left, like it is here, instead of it being straight down, if I flick slides, it's actually reducing the challenge to the pec in the bottom position due to being a resultant line of force, which is basically a combination of multiple line of forces. So this applies on, let's say, like a hack squat as well, or like a Smith machine squat if your feet are in front of you. You're not just pushing up, you're pushing up and back. So here in this case, if I'm pushing out, I'm getting a line of force pushing back the opposite direction, which means it's a combination of the two forces. So instead of I'll actually draw it just to make it a bit easier to understand. So instead of the line being straight down, I'll try and find a straight line to make life easier. So there's also a, sorry, that's right. So there's also a challenge of us, let's say, pressing this direction. As a result, the line of force would be a combination of the two. So the resultant force would potentially be something like this. So it would be somewhere in the middle. So obviously, see, because we're only pushing out a slight extent, the line of force wouldn't be right in the middle, or the resultant line of force. Just because we're pushing out just slightly, we'd still be pressing mainly up, which means the line of force will be here. See if we like purposely focus as much as we possibly could on pressing out, then instead of being like that, if we pressed out as much as we can without actually doing so, the line of force would be more maybe at the middle, or it would be closer to here. It depends how much weight's on the bar, and it also depends on your internal focus. So what the resultant line of force would look like is something like this. You don't need to know exacts, but it just tells you roughly what's happening during the movement. But hope you've enjoyed this and found it valuable. It's a bit of a confusing concept to go over at first. It's a wee bit like, kind of like, why do you need to know this? But as you found out, like, we can now think about these concepts and think, right, how can that influence my stance? How can that influence what movement I choose? How can my grip influence the challenge to the pec on the bench press? And what can I potentially think about internally to increase the focus on my chest? For example, as I just touched on there, because you're pressing out at the top, the tensions, or the moment arm actually drops off at the bottom. As you can see here, the moment arm's smaller because the weight's not going straight down. So as a result, what could we think about instead if we are pressing up, which is decreasing the challenge to your chest? We can think about pressing in. If we think about pressing in, that means we're still going to be pressing straight up, we're not going to be pressing out. So nothing could change weight wise, but if we just do that, focus on pressing in while pressing up and focus on driving our hands together, if you even do that without weight, you'll feel your chest contract, and that's because that's the role of our pec. So that can encourage us to still bias our chest while lifting the same weight, which is a really interesting concept. So hope you've enjoyed. Any questions, please let me know. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.